services to operate, so it doesn't utilize any public infrastructure. Where was I? Oh, and it does not burden local infrastructure, and it's sited and designed with careful attention to safety, environmental protection, and compatibility with the surrounding area. So all that's to say is that this facility is not going to strain anything that the local community utilizes. One of the other questions that we had seen is how are we able to build on this land, and what are the environmental studies that were conducted? So we conducted a wetland delineation, a full field wetland delineation. The APA and their biologists joined us with our wetland surveyor to confirm the boundaries that we have delineated, and they actually are saying, hey, they required us to restore part of a wetland. So we are restoring that by planting wetland species into where they delineated a wetland on site that our facility is outside of, but we're committing to restoring it. No, in collaboration with the APA, we also got a no permit required letter because we don't disturb any wetlands or water features on site, but we're still going to restore that wetland that the APA biologist determined. So. As I mentioned, wetlands and on-site water features will not be contaminated. The studies that we've provided and the memos we've provided, confirm that. In addition to no discharge to soil, no interaction with groundwater at all. And the application materials detail how stormwater grading and site controls reinforce that protection. One of the other questions we got was the pilot agreement will be the pilot agreement, how it works. So the pilot agreement, this is another way for us to increase the tax revenue for the town. Pilots are split up between the county, school district, and the town. That's why we wanted to enter into the host community agreement directly with the town, because the town usually gets the least amount in that carve out. It's beyond our control, and we can't fix that, but what we can do is contribute additional funds like we are through the host community agreement. That amount is determined on a formula-based approach, and that's done through the Industrial Development Agency. Next question was why wasn't a letter sent to residents about this project? So the town did do a really good job of publicizing it. They posted about this project and the public hearing on Facebook, local newspapers. They sent out an official notice. I personally sent 7 letters to 17 adjacent landowners ahead of the public hearing, soliciting feedback to field any questions. I truly was trying to set up meetings with everybody to see if they did have questions or concerns, how I can respond and answer and address them. I personally also reached out to the lead petitioner of the petition about this project on January 9th to arrange a meeting and answer any questions or concerns. I followed up on January 12th and provided all the application materials that we submitted to the town and to the APA. So people keep asking, like, hey, can I see the materials? No problem. I've sent them to 3 people already. There was a couple people at the public hearing that I sent it to. Happy to share it. Who is financially responsible if this project catches fire? We are. The project company and the owner-operator is responsible for this facility. If something goes wrong, it's our responsibility to take care of it. Was a host community agreement set up? Yes, a host community agreement is included in this project. Was any proper soil testing done to confirm that the soil is stabilized? So this part of the process is done after zoning approval. Now that we have our required permits, we'll be performing a geotechnical survey and study in the next couple of weeks. This is a routine for any development. Development and construction needs to be done at this stage in the process to confirm the stability of soils in preparation for construction. So we just weren't there yet. We didn't want to jump the gun before we actually had entitlements to the project and an approved permit. Next question is, why was this site selected? So it's a great question, and there's a multitude of factors that determine the location of these projects. It starts with utility infrastructure, and that serves as the primary driver, but there's more, and I'll get into that right now. So we first review publicly available GIS data that the utility issues to determine where the facilities are needed based on feeder capacity, substation capacity, 3-phase feeder connection availability to a parcel, and where ancillary services will be the most beneficial to the grid. So that's like congestion relief, voltage regulation, etc. So then we begin spending some money with the utility to go through the study process with them. We go through those a number of studies to determine the feasibility of connection, the number of upgrades that are needed, how we'll design and install the system. That includes collaboration with the utility engineering department. So that's the first step, and then from there we look at the town zoning. We speak with the building inspector, and then we really dive into the environmental impacts. Are there wetlands on site? Are there threatened endangered species in the area? Are there archaeological and historical implications? Do we have enough buildable area to support the infrastructure? Agricultural mitigation, ecological and habitat assessments, all of these things, there's a bunch of layers that we need to go through before we can proceed with a project to make sure it's developed responsibly. There's some more, but those are the primary things that we have to look at to see where these facilities are needed and where they can go. What testing was done to confirm the soil stability and load-bearing capacity? Similar to the other question is, it just wasn't, geotechnical surveys are conducted in the next couple of weeks, and that's because it follows zoning approval, and it's a pre-construction item that gets done. It's not something that gets done during zoning approval. It's kind of inappropriate to do that. It would be us kind of assuming that we're going to be able to move forward, which in this case, in any case, we never assume that. So it's always on the back end. Simply with a geotech, like if soils aren't that stable and need more support, it's just added cost for us to make sure that it's stable, to make sure that there's stability, and a structural engineer would never sign or stamp site plans unless it's up to snuff. Were alternative sites outside the Adirondack evaluated? Yes, we have sites all throughout the state. These facilities are going to be dispersed throughout the state to materially strengthen the electric grid. So yes, there are sites outside the Adirondack, and there's more sites that are being proposed now. Having a vast network in these facilities dramatically helps grid stability, resiliency, security, and operation. Is the town aware this site has been flagged through wetland GIS mapping? We did a full wetland delineation on site, not just from a desktop GIS map, but we actually had a biologist go on site, as I mentioned, and they met with the APA as well. This project is placed in an area on the parcel that avoids impacting any wetlands. Carson's also committed to restoring wetlands on site, and consultation with the APA was done, and they agreed. So we were aware that they were present, but we were conscious of that and made sure that we were outside of any area to impact them. And in addition, committed to planting over 100 trees of wetland species to restore that wetland. Has a phase 1 ESA been conducted? Yes, it has been, and there is no wrecks, no contamination of where our project's going. Next question is, what protections are in place to prevent contamination of wetlands and nearby water features? The batteries, these units themselves are sealed and self-contained systems, so as I mentioned, there's no routine water use, no discharge to soil, no interaction with groundwater at all. The facility is designed specifically to avoid environmental pathways, and the application materials detail how stormwater grading and site controls reinforce that protection. We did include a detailed groundwater safety memo as well in the application materials that kind of goes into the technical items there.
What if there's a fire in the runoff from the water? Yeah.
So,
that's a concern. That's not about
yeah, so we submitted, I'll get to that in more detail, but we did submit a big study from Fire Risk Alliance. They're a third-party independent expert of fire safety, and in the event that something was to happen, there is no contamination that requires remediation. It's no different than any structural fire. But I'll get it, there's more on that later, but that's the simple answer. Has a Army Corps Section 404 permit been issued for this project? No, a nationwide permit, 404 permit is not required. In order for that permit to be required through the Army Corps of Engineers, you need to put fill or impervious surface into a wetland. We are not doing that here. We're avoiding wetlands entirely.
But it was.
So, no, the facility was never sited in a wetland area. It's outside of a wetland area entirely, and the wetland delineation shows that. Next question was, how will groundwater be monitored? Life cycle monitoring isn't required here because groundwater won't be contaminated even in the event that there is an incident. why. This gets into your question of like a thermal runaway event that are fire driven or above grade. Any byproducts that are contained within the equipment enclosure, and it's documented in Appendix 1, but the composition of runoff following a battery fire contains no substances more harmful than those typically found in any standard structural fire.
Even though there's thousands of batteries?
So evidence from real life experiences like the Moss Landing fire. During the 2025 Moss Landing best incidents, the EPA conducted a supplemental air monitoring for hydrogen fluoride and particulate matter. The EPA concluded that the measured levels did not pose any public health risk during the monitoring period. So just as importantly, no groundwater or soil contamination impacts were documented. The incident confirmed that BEST events are overwhelmingly atmospheric and enclosure level events they don't affect groundwater or aquifers. So local site controls for this project. The proposed project includes the following protective measures. So these facilities are UL 9540 certified and UL 9540A certified. That's specific to a thermal runaway event and fire specifically, and it looks at how the whole battery works together, not just certain components. And so that certification and that rating of that facility offers that same protection that everyone's looking for of what happens in the event of a thermal runaway event. And then there's thermal propagation testing as well included in those testings, so they stress the batteries on purpose to determine effects and harmful effects. And they're third-party labs. It's not something that any manufacturer will do. It's done by laboratories specific to conducting these types of tests. NFPA 855 is a compliant layout, spacing, and fire safety systems. Appropriate spacing between the battery units are imperative and really important, and that's how this facility is designed. There are no hazardous fluids stored below ground. So this facility doesn't have stored acid, or like a transformer has actual liquid in it. This is a different technology. It doesn't have that. These features collectively eliminate credible pathways for an enclosure level incident to affect any groundwater. So all to say, it does not contaminate anything within groundwater, air. Obviously, any fire is never good for the air, but it's no different than any other fire that you would currently experience today.
The heat rating on the metal? The heat rating on the metal of the containments?
How will contamination be handled if fire suppression water or runoff ever enters into the wetlands of the Great Sacandaga Lake? We will not be utilizing fire suppression chemicals. It's worse for the facility. It will contaminate. Fire suppression chemicals will actually contaminate the groundwater, cause the issues that we're concerned of. So we're not using fire suppression for this facility.
Nitrogen?
Who pays for environmental remediation? The project is responsible for remediation if it were to be required. The conclusion from the Warwick fires is that it was actually a successful failure. Nothing was damaged that required remediation, no one was hurt, no contamination, and nothing more than any other ordinary structure fire. That was the conclusion from those fires. Why is this facility safer? So this project incorporates multiple independent layers of fire prevention, detection, and response, all of which are described in the materials that have already been reviewed. It adheres to the most strict guidelines and standards, as I mentioned, UL 9540 and 9540A, NFPA 855, the New York State Uniform Fire Code, which was updated in January 26, like I mentioned, UL 1973, proper and safe spacing between battery units, ventilation and gas management, emergency response planning, an emergency action plan, thermal management systems in the facility itself, and a battery monitoring system, in addition to us offering training to the local fire department. Has a full fire analysis been completed and reviewed by independent experts? Yes, Fire Risk Alliance conducted a detailed study, and it was submitted to both the town, the APA, and the lead petitioner. And we retained ESRG to actually compile that emergency action plan. So we didn't come up with it. A fire consultant, all retired FDNY folks, they came up with the action plan. They are also going to be providing that training to the local fire department.
In the city?
By the way, ESRG also represents both municipalities and developers. So it's not like their business is to do things the right way because it's their reputation, and otherwise they will no longer be in business. Does the Northampton Fire Department have the training, equipment, and water supply needed? As I mentioned, we've committed to providing specific fire training to the local fire department in response to this project. Specifically, the emergency action plan that was included. There is no special equipment to fight these fires. There will be a cistern on site to hold water in the event that they need it, but typically we won't even put water on it because it's an electrical fire, so once the electricity runs out, the fire stops. Who assumed the liability and responsibility if a fire reignites? The project does not burden the town. Will residents be notified of evacuation zones and emergency procedures before construction? Evacuation won't be needed because we have an emergency action plan in place. In other instances, they've evacuated people because they didn't have that response plan in place. They didn't have a number to contact, and training wasn't given to the local fire department. We've committed to doing all those things and more to avoid any requirement for any evacuation. So that's part of why we did what we did. Has a full seeker environmental review been done, and if not, why? We did submit a environmental assessment form with our application, but as I mentioned earlier, during the review, the project was accurately deemed type 2 under part 617, specifically number 45, due to it being in the APA. So the jurisdiction was deemed to the APA, and we had to provide a ton of environmental studies and impact studies to confirm that there wasn't going to be an adverse effect and get them comfortable with the project. And that timeline lasted pretty much the same that it did with the town. It was about 6 months.
Aren't most other projects type 1?
The board allowed the APA to be the environmental lead, but the board still required us, the planning board, they still required us to perform all the same studies. So all the same environmental studies and tests for RT, species, wetlands, ecological assessments, etc. That was all done during the review process as well. What local benefit does this facility provide? So a 5 megawatt, 4-hour distributed generation system like this benefits the community by absorbing excess energy that otherwise gets wasted when demand is low, and then it discharges when demand is high.